"Daddy, why do you always go home before morning?" Emma asked the question while holding a picture book against her chest. She was almost 3 now, old enough to notice routines and young enough to believe every routine must have a simple explanation. Grant Sullivan stood beside the garden gate of the Coastal Reading Center, one hand resting on the handle of his car door. Nearly 20 months had passed since the afternoon he first met his daughter beneath the flowering tree. During that time, Natalie had allowed him into Emma's life carefully. He had started with supervised visits at the library, then Saturday lunches, then full afternoons at Natalie's small house near the harbor. He knew which cup Emma used for milk, which stuffed animal had to sit on the left side of her pillow, and which page of Goodnight Moon she always asked him to read twice. But he still slept in a rented cottage 3 streets away. Grant knelt until his eyes were level with Emma's. "Because your mother and I are still learning how to be a family again," he said. "And learning takes time." Emma thought about this. Like tying shoes. A lot like tying shoes. You do it wrong first. Sometimes many times. Natalie stood several feet away, listening. There was no anger in her face, but she had learned not to confuse a good answer with a finished change. Emma leaned closer to Grant. "Will you come tomorrow?" "Yes. 4 o'clock. Before 4. At 4. Not before, not after." That made her smile. She hugged his neck, then ran back toward the children gathered inside for the reading center's spring celebration. Grant watched her go. Moments like this still felt almost impossible to him. There had been a time when he believed fatherhood would begin with a hospital photograph, a family announcement, and a perfectly prepared nursery. Instead, it had begun with a borrowed picture book and a little girl studying his face to decide whether his words could be trusted. Marianne Cole, the foundation director, approached from the library entrance. She was not smiling. "Grant," she said, "we need to talk before you leave." Inside her office, Marianne placed a white legal envelope on the desk. Ruth Callahan sat beside her. Ruth was 68, a retired elementary school teacher with silver hair, practical shoes, and the kind of calm authority that made children lower their voices without being asked. She had founded the center's weekly grandparent reading circle after her husband died and had become one of Emma's favorite people. Natalie remained standing. Marianne opened the envelope. "The foundation received this yesterday." The notice stated that the reading center's lease would end in 45 days. The building, garden, clinic rooms, and neighboring apartments had been included in a waterfront redevelopment scheduled to begin that summer. Demolition permits were already in progress. At the top of the page was the name Sullivan Development Group. At the bottom was Grant's signature. For several seconds, no one spoke. Grant read the date. The agreement had been approved almost 4 years earlier, during the period when he missed Natalie's medical appointments, worked through weekends, and measured success by how quickly land could be converted into profit. He remembered the project name, Harbor Point. He remembered a presentation filled with glass towers, luxury shops, a private marina, and projected revenue. He did not remember this library. Natalie looked at him. "Did you know?" "I knew about the development. I did not know this center was part of it." Ruth folded her hands in her lap. "That usually means no one important thought we were important enough to mention." Grant did not defend himself. He looked through the office window. Children sat in a circle while a volunteer read aloud. A pregnant woman waited near the small prenatal resource desk. An older man practiced filling out an online benefits form with help from a teenager. The building was not impressive by the standards of his old life. Its floors creaked. The paint near the windows had begun to peel. Yet it held more evidence of human connection in one afternoon than his mansion had held in years. "I can buy the property back," Grant said. Natalie's expression hardened. Ruth answered before she could. "That is the first thought rich men always have. Buy the problem. Own the solution." Grant turned toward her. "What should my first thought be? Ask what happened. Ask who will be hurt. Then listen long enough to hear an answer you do not like." The words embarrassed him because they were deserved. Marianne explained that relocating the center would cost more than the foundation could raise. Many families walked there. The prenatal classes, legal clinic, and senior literacy program depended on the location. Moving 10 miles inland might preserve the organization on paper while making it unreachable to the people who needed it. Grant folded the notice. "I will suspend the demolition and review the project." "Can you?" Natalie asked. "Or do you only mean you will try?" "I do not know yet." It was not the reassuring answer he once would have given. It was the honest one. He looked at Marianne and Ruth. I will find out what authority I still have. I will bring you the full information, including the parts that make me look responsible. Ruth studied him carefully. That would be a beginning. Outside, Emma waved through the window. Grant raised his hand. Natalie walked him to the garden gate. Do not save this place to prove you deserve us, she said. I understand. No, you understand the sentence. I am asking whether you understand the difference. Grant looked back at the building, then at the signature carrying his name. The difference is that this place matters even if you never forgive me. Natalie's eyes softened, but only slightly. Yes, she said. That is the difference. The next morning, Grant returned to the headquarters of Sullivan Development and called an emergency board meeting. Thomas Keller sat at the far end of the conference table. He was 71, tall, silver-haired, and still carried himself with the confidence of the man who had once hired Grant when he was 26 and nearly broke. Thomas had taught him how to negotiate, how to read a room, and how to hide uncertainty behind a calm expression. He had also taught him that personal needs were distractions serious men learned to overcome. When Grant requested a 90-day suspension of the Harbor Point demolition, Thomas did not look surprised. I wondered when your new conscience would become expensive, he said. The board reviewed the project. Harbor Point had already attracted hotel partners, construction commitments, and private investors. Delaying it could trigger penalties. Canceling it might cost hundreds of jobs. Grant listened to every concern. I am not asking the board to cancel the project today, he said. I am asking us to examine what we approved before we remove people from a neighborhood we never visited. Thomas leaned forward. You visited yesterday because your wife happened to be there. That is true. Several directors looked up. Grant continued. I should have visited 4 years ago. My failure to notice the people affected does not make them less real. After the meeting, Thomas followed him into the hallway. I built you, Thomas said quietly. I took you into rooms that would not have opened for you. I taught you how to win. You taught me a great deal. And now you are prepared to weaken a company because a child asked why you go home at night? Grant stopped walking. Thomas's voice softened. I did not destroy your family, Grant. I taught you how to win. You were simply a better student than I expected. For a moment, Grant saw their entire relationship clearly. Thomas had not forced him to miss dinners or ignore Natalie's loneliness. But he had given those choices a respectable philosophy. Sacrifice the evening. Delay the vacation. Ignore the complaint. There would always be time later, after the next deal, the next promotion, the next year. Grant had believed him because the rewards arrived quickly and the losses arrived slowly. I am grateful for what you taught me, Grant said. But I am no longer willing to become the man those lessons require. Thomas smiled without warmth. Then the board may decide you are no longer the man this company requires. Grant spent the next 3 weeks reviewing Harbor Point. He walked every block with local residents. He met shop owners, tenants, construction workers, nurses, and city planners. He did not bring cameras. Ruth accompanied him one afternoon. She showed him the apartment where she and her husband, Ben, had lived for 32 years. After Ben retired, they planned a train trip across the country. Ruth continued teaching 2 extra years because they wanted more savings. Then Ben developed a heart condition and died 6 months before the trip. We kept saying later, she told Grant as they stood beside the harbor. Later, when the mortgage was smaller. Later, when school was out. Later, when we felt more secure. She looked toward the water. Later is the most expensive promise 2 people can make. You pay for it with days you cannot buy back. Grant said nothing. He knew the sentence would remain with him. Architects produced an alternative plan. Instead of removing the entire neighborhood, the company could restore the old cannery, preserve the library and clinic, build mixed-income housing, and reduce the size of the private marina. The return would be lower and slower, but the project could still create jobs. Grant became consumed by the work. He told himself it was different now because the work mattered. He believed that saving the center justified late nights, postponed meals, and constant calls. Then, on a Thursday evening, he failed Emma. The reading center was hosting family story night. Emma had practiced for a week. She planned to stand beside Ruth and say one line from her favorite book while Grant and Natalie sat in the front row. Grant promised he would arrive by 6. At 5:20, Thomas called an emergency meeting with 2 investors threatening to withdraw. Grant intended to stay for 10 minutes. 10 minutes became 30. By the time he looked at the clock, it was 6:45. He drove to the center without calling because he was ashamed to hear Natalie's voice. The program had ended. Parents folded chairs while volunteers cleared paper cups. Ruth stood near the stage holding Emma's small cardigan. Natalie sat in the last row with Emma asleep against her chest. The child still held the picture book she had planned to read with him. Grant stopped at the doorway. Natalie looked at him. She did not raise her voice. She kept watching the door, she said. I am sorry. She said you promised. I know. You are saving this building because you say families need it. Tonight, your daughter did not need a building saved. She needed one chair filled. Grant looked at the empty chair beside Natalie. There was no defense he could offer. The investors had been important. The meeting had been real. But he had made the same old mistake, treating the people he loved as the only part of life that could safely be delayed. I failed her, he said. Yes. Natalie lifted Emma carefully. Do not come home with us tonight. Grant nodded. He did not send flowers. He did not buy Emma a gift. He did not ask Ruth to explain his intentions. The next morning, he arrived at Natalie's house at 8 after asking permission by text. Emma sat at the kitchen table eating cereal. Grant knelt beside her. I said I would come, and I did not, he told her. That was wrong. Emma looked down at her spoon. I waited. I know. I am sorry. Work? Yes. But work is not an excuse for making you wonder. She did not hug him. Will you miss again? Grant could not honestly promise that he would never be late or make another mistake. I may make mistakes, he said, but I will tell you the truth, and I will not pretend a mistake did not hurt. Emma considered this, then pushed a piece of banana toward him. It was not forgiveness. It was an opening. Later that day, Grant changed the way he managed the Harbor Point review. He appointed Daniel Price, the company's operations chief, to lead negotiations. He gave the architects authority to answer routine questions without waiting for him. He created written limits around evening meetings and told the board that family commitments would be treated like any other fixed obligation. Thomas called the changes weakness. Grant called them structure. Natalie noticed the difference over the following weeks. Grant did not become less responsible at work. He became less convinced that responsibility required his personal presence in every room. He returned to family story night the next month and sat in the front row. Emma spoke only 4 words. My daddy came back. The audience smiled. Grant lowered his head for a moment because the sentence felt both like mercy and a warning. 2 days later, Vanessa Reed contacted him. They met in a quiet diner outside the city. Vanessa arrived carrying a worn leather folder. She no longer worked for Sullivan Development. After the previous audit, she had accepted a consulting position with Stonebridge Capital, one of Harbor Point's largest investors. Before she opened the folder, she said, There is something I should have told you a long time ago. Grant waited. I sent the Literacy Foundation invitation that brought you to the coast. Grant's expression changed. Vanessa continued quickly. I did not know Natalie would attend that opening. I had seen her illustrations on the foundation website, but I did not know she lived nearby or that Emma would be there. I sent the invitation because I discovered Sullivan Development controlled the Harbor Point property. I wanted you to see the center before demolition notices were issued. Why anonymously? Because I was afraid you would ignore it if it came from me. Why not tell me directly? Because direct honesty was never a habit I practiced around you. She opened the folder. Months earlier, Vanessa had found an internal report showing that the luxury version of Harbor Point carried hidden costs. The soil beneath the cannery required expensive cleanup. Several subsidized apartments could not legally be removed without replacement. If those costs rose, the luxury project could lose money. Thomas had removed the report from the board's final packet. There was more. A company controlled by Thomas's younger brother had purchased land beside the proposed marina. The hotel project would increase its value dramatically. Did you know this when you sent the invitation? Grant asked. I knew the numbers were incomplete. I did not know about Thomas's brother until last week. And you stayed silent? Yes. Vanessa did not blame anyone else. She admitted that years of ambition had taught her to treat information as leverage instead of responsibility. She had encouraged Grant to prioritize work because his dependence on her made her powerful. She had called Natalie emotional because it was easier than admitting Natalie saw what their culture was doing to him. I helped build a room where cruelty sounded efficient, Vanessa said. I cannot ask Natalie to forgive that. I can only stop protecting it. Grant studied the documents. Are you willing to testify? Yes. Even if Stonebridge fires you? Yes. Why now? Vanessa looked toward an older couple sharing pie at the next table. My mother died last year, she said. I kept delaying visits because I was busy proving I did not need anyone. By the time I finally had time, she no longer knew my name. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened around the coffee cup. I used to think regret was a feeling weak people carried. Now I know it is a bill that arrives after the life you meant to live has already been spent. Grant did not tell her everything would be all right. Some losses were not repaired by a lesson. He asked whether he could show the files to Natalie before releasing them publicly. Vanessa agreed. Natalie read them that evening at her kitchen table. When Grant revealed that Vanessa had sent the invitation, Natalie was silent for a long time. She knew my work was connected to the foundation, she said. Yes, but she says she did not know I would be there. I believe the documents. I do not know how much of her intention I can prove. Natalie closed the folder. Do not turn her into the villain who caused everything. You chose your absences. I know. And do not turn her into a hero because she finally told the truth. I know that too. The following week, Grant sent the files to independent counsel and the full board. Thomas responded by releasing Grant's old emails to the press. One message appeared on every major business channel. Do not let neighborhood objections delay closing. The email was authentic. Reporters crowded outside Sullivan Development. Commentators accused Grant of inventing a moral crisis only after discovering that his wife and daughter used the property. Some called the alternative plan a public relations performance. Grant's advisors drafted a statement blaming the incomplete reports he had received. He deleted it. At a live press conference, he displayed the entire email chain, including the pages showing that community objections had been summarized for him. He had not been completely uninformed. He had chosen not to read carefully. My signature is real, Grant said. My words are real. Mr. Keller's conflict does not erase my responsibility. Vanessa Reed's silence does not erase my responsibility. The fact that I have changed does not erase my responsibility. A reporter asked whether he expected the public to forgive him. No, Grant answered. The public is not required to participate in my redemption. The only useful question is what I am willing to repair when forgiveness is not guaranteed. The statement spread quickly. Some people praised him. Others said accepting responsibility after being exposed was not courage. Grant did not argue with either group. The board suspended him as chief executive pending an investigation. That same night, Emma developed a harsh cough and struggled to breathe. Natalie called Grant from the car while driving to the emergency room. He arrived before they were taken into an examination room. The doctor diagnosed croup and explained that Emma would likely recover after treatment and observation. Grant remained beside the bed while Natalie held a small oxygen mask near Emma's face. At 7 the next morning, Daniel called. The board would vote at 8 on whether to remove Grant permanently and restore the original Harbor Point plan. Natalie heard enough of the conversation to understand. You should join the meeting, she said. Grant looked at Emma, who was sleeping more peacefully. I prepared Daniel to present the alternative. That is not what I asked. Grant recognized the test beneath her words. Part of him wanted to stay in the room because staying would look like proof. But another part understood that balance was not the same as choosing family in every visible conflict. He called Daniel and joined the first 20 minutes of the meeting by video from an empty hospital conference room. He answered questions, confirmed his vote, and authorized Daniel to continue without him. Then he returned to Emma before she woke. The board removed him as chief executive by one vote. When he told Natalie, she took his hand. You did not abandon the meeting, she said. No. And you did not abandon her. No. That is different from what you used to do. Grant looked through the glass at Emma's sleeping face. It should never have taken losing everything to learn something so ordinary. Ruth visited later that morning carrying soup for Natalie and a stuffed train for Emma. She sat beside Grant in the hallway. I heard about the vote, she said. I lost. Ruth shook her head. Be careful with that word. You lost a position. That is not the same as losing yourself. The independent investigation moved quickly. The hidden report was verified. Thomas's family connection had not been disclosed. Stonebridge suspended funding for the luxury plan and demanded a public hearing before investing further. Thomas requested a private meeting with Grant in the office where they had negotiated their first major acquisition together. You are letting people humiliate you, Thomas said. I am letting them see what I did. You think confession makes you noble? No. Then why destroy your reputation? Because protecting a false reputation would require more damage. Thomas walked toward the window. You will miss the power, he said. You will miss being the person everyone waits for. Grant thought about Emma watching the library door. I already know what it costs to make people wait for me. Thomas's face tightened. For the first time, Grant wondered what Thomas had sacrificed. There were no family photographs in the office. No children's drawings. No evidence of a life beyond achievements. Was it worth it? Grant asked. Thomas turned. Was what worth it? All of this. Thomas did not answer. The public hearing took place 6 weeks later in the old municipal courthouse. Harbor residents sat beside construction workers worried about their jobs. Investors brought attorneys. Foundation volunteers carried boxes of letters. Natalie attended with Emma, but sat among the community members. She had helped the architects design family spaces, yet she refused to become the symbol of Grant's redemption. Marion spoke about the center's programs. Sophia Ramirez, the prenatal nurse, explained that moving the clinic would prevent many women without cars from attending. A contractor described how restoring the cannery could preserve construction jobs. Vanessa testified about the missing report in her own silence. Then Ruth approached the microphone. She did not discuss financial projections. She held a photograph of herself and Ben at their 25th anniversary. My husband and I spent 30 years planning what we would do later, she said. Later, we would travel. Later, we would volunteer together. Later, we would stop being too tired to enjoy the life we worked for. The room became still. He died 6 months before later was supposed to begin. Ruth placed the photograph on the table. This center is where I learned that grief can become service if you give it somewhere to go. I read to children here. I help grandparents use computers. I sit with women who are frightened before medical appointments. Please do not tell us this building can be replaced by another address. A community is not furniture. You cannot pack it into boxes and expect every relationship to arrive intact. Several older residents lowered their eyes. Thomas's attorneys argued that Grant's alternative plan was sentimental and financially uncertain. They displayed Grant's email again. When Grant spoke, he did not ask the panel to believe he was a good man. I dismissed these residents before I met them, he said. That is the truth. I also believed leadership meant making every important decision myself. That belief damaged my company and my family. He presented a simpler alternative plan. The library, clinic, and affordable apartments would remain. The cannery would be restored into mixed-income housing and local business space. The marina would be smaller. The company would earn less money, but it would still earn money and preserve most construction jobs. Then Grant placed a signed legal proposal on the table. The library, clinic, and garden would be transferred into a permanent community land trust. Residents, the foundation, and independent civic leaders would control the property. Sullivan Development could not sell it later. Grant would personally cover the largest contract penalty, so employee retirement funds would not absorb the loss. Thomas stood. This is an attempt to buy redemption. Grant looked toward Natalie, but he did not speak to her. Redemption cannot be purchased, he said. That is why the property will not belong to me. The panel approved the revised plan. Stonebridge accepted the lower return because the cleanup risks were clearer and the community opposition had been resolved through enforceable protections. Thomas resigned before the board completed its conflict review. Reporters called it Grant's victory. Grant corrected them. It is a community agreement, he said. If the outcome depends on one powerful person remaining kind, then the system has not changed. The board later offered to restore him as chief executive. He declined, but not as a grand sacrifice. He recommended Daniel as CEO and accepted a temporary role as non-executive chairman to help rebuild oversight and protect employees during the transition. When he told Natalie, she asked, "Are you leaving because you are ashamed of wanting the job?" "No. Part of me still wants it." "Then why decline?" "Because I finally understand the difference between being useful and being indispensable. The company needs systems. Emma needs a father. You need a partner, not another crisis to manage." Natalie looked at him for a long time. "I do not need you to make your life smaller for us. I know. I need to make it whole." 3 months later, the court formally recognized Grant as Emma's father and approved the gradual parenting plan Natalie and Grant had already built. Outside the courthouse, Emma asked why everyone had signed so many papers. "It means I am your father on paper too," Grant explained. Emma frowned. "You were already my dad." Yes. Paper is slow. Natalie laughed for the first time that morning. Healing was slow too. Grant and Natalie began counseling every Tuesday evening. Some sessions were gentle. Others forced them to revisit moments they both wished they could avoid. Natalie admitted that leaving without allowing Grant to know Emma had been born protected her sense of safety, but it also created questions their daughter would someday deserve to have answered. Grant admitted that his generosity could become another form of control. He often offered solutions before asking what anyone wanted. They did not move back in together. They did not announce a reunion. Grant continued living in the small cottage near Natalie's house. He attended Emma's preschool events. He learned how to braid hair badly and pack lunches properly. When work required travel, he told Emma in advance. When a flight was delayed, he called before she had to wonder. He still made mistakes. Once, during a difficult week, he answered emails through most of dinner. Natalie did not leave the room or punish him with silence. She placed her hand over the phone and said, "You are here, but you are disappearing." Grant turned it off. Another time, Natalie refused his offer to pay for a larger art studio. Grant felt rejected and became distant for 2 days before admitting that giving money still made him feel safer than asking what support looked like. They were not rebuilding because they had become perfect. They were rebuilding because failure no longer sent them into hiding. 1 year after the hearing, Harbor House opened inside the restored cannery. The building contained a larger library, prenatal rooms, classrooms, affordable apartments, and offices for small local businesses. A brass plaque listed hundreds of residents, workers, nurses, teachers, and volunteers who shaped the project. Grant's name appeared in the same size as everyone else's. Ruth opened the ceremony by reading a children's story Ben had once given her. Afterward, she stood beside the harbor and watched grandparents walk through the new garden. "I used to think moving forward meant leaving grief behind," she told Natalie. "Now I think it means carrying love into a place where it can still be useful." Natalie squeezed her hand. That evening, after the crowd left, Natalie asked Grant to meet her beneath the flowering tree where he had first seen Emma. She handed him a folded piece of cream-colored stationery. For one terrible second, the old memory returned. The empty mansion, the wedding ring, the note telling him to ask when he stopped seeing her. Natalie saw the fear in his face. "This is not another goodbye," she said. Grant opened the note. "I kept my wedding ring because I could not decide whether our promise had ended or whether we had stopped living it. I do not want the old marriage back. I want to build a new one with the man who learned that being present is not one decision. It is a life made from thousands of them." The ring rested inside the fold. Grant picked it up, then placed it in Natalie's palm. "You should choose when to wear it," he said. "Not because I need proof. Because the promise belongs to you too." Natalie slid the ring onto her finger. "I am not forgetting," she said. "I would never ask you to. When Emma is old enough, we will tell her the truth. Not so she chooses a side. So she understands that love can survive mistakes only when people stop hiding from what they did." Grant nodded. They did not renew their vows that night. They waited 6 more months. During those months, they chose a modest house near the harbor. It had a small kitchen, an uneven backyard, and a room upstairs where Emma asked them to hang paper stars across the ceiling. Their vow renewal took place in that backyard with fewer than 20 people. Vanessa attended quietly after apologizing to Natalie, without asking for friendship or forgiveness. Thomas did not attend. Grant had written to him once, saying the door to an honest conversation remained open. No answer came. Ruth stood beside Emma, who carried the stuffed rabbit from the nursery. Grant did not promise never to fail again. "I promise to speak before silence becomes distance," he said. "I promise to listen before I defend myself. I promise not to call tomorrow a plan when today is still available." Natalie promised to tell the truth before pain became disappearance. She promised boundaries without punishment and forgiveness without pretending nothing had happened. They understood that a second marriage between the same 2 people could not survive on nostalgia. It required 2 people willing to release the versions of themselves that had once made love unsafe. Months later, Grant woke before sunrise and found Natalie's side of the bed empty. The old panic returned for a single heartbeat. Then he heard laughter downstairs. He followed the sound into the kitchen. Natalie and Emma were making pancakes shaped like crooked stars. Flour covered the counter. One pancake burned in the pan, while Emma wore an apron almost as long as her dress. Grant's phone vibrated on the table. The message came from Daniel. Not urgent. Call after breakfast. Grant left the phone where it was. Emma held up the least damaged pancake. Dad, you get the first star. He sat between them as morning light filled the kitchen. On the wall beside the table hung Ruth's photograph of Ben and a handwritten sentence she had given them on their wedding day. Later is expensive. Love people while time is still willing to wait. Grant looked at Natalie. Her ring caught the morning light, but it was not the ring that convinced him their family had survived. It was the flower on her cheek, Emma's bare feet against the chair, the burned smell in the kitchen, and the fact that no one in the room was waiting for him to arrive. Years earlier, Natalie had warned him that losing someone could begin through hundreds of ordinary moments too small to notice. Now he understood that rebuilding a life happened the same way. Not through one public victory, not through one sacrifice, not through one apology powerful enough to erase the past. It happened through ordinary moments, chosen while they were still available. The richest thing Grant Sullivan ever built was not a company, a mansion, or a waterfront development. It was a life in which the people he loved no longer had to wonder whether he could see them. And for the first time, when morning came, no one was leaving.